Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am Joyce Deuley, Senior Research Analyst for Zpryme. I'm definitely excited about leveling up radical change makers and innovation models. This is going to be a fantastic panel, a really awesome discussion, really engaging. I remember I had to take the call at the airport last week because I was on my way to another conference, so I'm standing with a mask on, like got the earbuds in, doing a camera thing, and I was really tempted to let the time run over an hour, but then I would have missed my flight. So I think we could probably have about 4 different panel conversations as a result of today's talk. I will encourage you to come up to the panelists afterwards and talk to them because they're all very brilliant and fantastic, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. So joining us today is Dwayne Stradford from AEP. We have Gerry Metzler with QBA, and Kumi Premathilake, oh, nope, butchered it, from Hubbell Power Systems. You want to pronounce your name really nicely?
Kumi Premathilake, but as I told Joyce, I never get offended by people mispronouncing my name, so no worries.
Deeply grateful. Okay, so we're talking about, we're in an era of technological, social, and economic transformation. Utility business models simply cannot afford to stay the same. The session will focus on how utilities are really approaching these changes, not just from a business model perspective, but also from an internal cultural shift. So I would really love it if our panelists could, give some opening thoughts on what radical change means to them within the industry. Kumi, do you want to start us off?
Sure. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here. Really great panel and a wonderful audience. So let me talk a little bit about myself and then give you some thoughts around what I think. First of all, Division Vice President of Advancing Metering Infrastructure, Utility Automation, and Services at Hubbell Utility Solutions. And Joyce talking about, radical change. I really want to focus on the customer as the central key theme here. My team and I regularly talk to our customers about the most pressing issues that are challenging to them as their world changes, right? And 3 things really come to mind when we talk. The first, since we are in Austin, distributed energy and grid modernization initiatives and how that is impacting the grid. The second one is EV penetration and how the load profiles are changing and how do we adjust to that, especially with Tesla, factories coming online, residential and commercial loads, and lots of our customers here, it's in their territories. The third is really around resilience, right? COVID happened, things changed, people started working from home. Then there's severe weather events, what happened in Texas last year. So really around the internal and external threats and how do we build a more resilient grid. So those are the kind of the 3 things that I wanted to introduce.
Nothing big at all.
We could probably talk for hours.
Gerry.
Thanks, Joyce, and thanks, Premi. This is the kind of subject, my head hurts actually after listening to the scope of that daunting challenge. And at a high level, I always think about the velocity of the change that we're all experiencing today. It's fast, it's coming at us, we're living it. Our organizations have to be prepared to cope with it, and utilities in particular, because they span a broad swath of the energy value chain. They have to have organizations ramped up to cope with the change. The second area is the complexity of the change. In the last couple days, we've heard about micro devices. We've heard about ancillary services markets and devices associated with that, EV, DER, all of that wonderful stuff that will have an impact on the utilities business model, some to the good, some you have to be defensive about because it's going to erode your cost structure. The third area is in this world of standards. does not get talked about enough and yet is sorely lacking. In fact, I would suggest that the standards boards that utilities have to deal with move even slower than utilities themselves, and that's saying a lot. Now, tactically, you're dealing with the proliferation of devices everywhere. In the plant, synchrophasers across the transmission grid, distributed energy is becoming increasingly more pervasive. And while it's really fun to listen to all the device manufacturers, and they do a great job, they're not perfect. And the best, let's say, of the smart meter manufacturers, even if they're perhaps 0.1% off, and you've got a huge footprint of customers, that's a lot of data to chase down. So having a view into the devices themselves and an organization that's ramped up to manage those devices is key for a utility to stay on top of. With those devices comes the proliferation of data, and it's massive. That's why my company exists. It's a big energy, big data company. And then the third area is the cybersecurity. The data's got to be secure. And as you're hanging devices across the entire energy value chain, the utilities are the ones who have to make sure that they're secure. So that's what I'm interested in hearing our panelists talk about today.
So I think Gerry just laid out the entire landscape for us all with that comment. Thank you, Gerry. Because
Sorry.
No, absolutely. No, it's great.
Now your head hurts. So.
Now my head hurts. Dwayne, would love your perspective.
Yeah, Dwayne Stradford, and one of the things, I'm in NERC compliance space now, so there are a lot of standards out there that dictate that your models have to be clean and pure. You look at TPL standard from an R1 perspective, making sure that all of your lines are taken care of, your transformers, your load, everything from that aspect. You look at it from the aspect of mod 32, 33, PRC2, where you got disturbance monitoring equipment that's out in the field that can help you improve your models as it relates to your dynamic stability models when you do dynamic stability analysis. Previously, I started my career at AEP in '94 as an operations engineer in the control center, supporting dispatch centers and what have you. So a lot of times you look at it from the aspect of your EMS models that go out and you do contingency analysis, and now they're getting improved to where you can do voltage contingency analysis. Having that tie back to your planning teams, there should be a communication between your operations teams and your planning teams, if not on a quarterly basis, on a semi-annual basis. Annual is a little bit, long to do that, but there should be a regular contact between your operations team and your planning team. And the main thing you want to do with that is everything that you're getting off the real-time grid, there should be a feedback loop into your planning organization with that model, because a lot of folks that deal with the EMS model, they get that information from the planning team. So it's almost like the planning organization is the car manufacturer. We're talking about EVs, right? And your operations team is kind of like the test driver. So if you don't have that feedback loop, a lot of times you can miss improving your model such that you could potentially have ratings out there that are not accurate, which could create false congestion on the grid. Inaccurate ratings could lead to then missing out timing on different upgrades that you can apply to the grid. So just making sure that there's a feedback loop between your planning and operations organization from a modeling perspective is something I'm very interested in, and just kind of go from there.
Amazing, thank you. So clearly we have a really nice diverse panel of perspectives. So I think this is going to make for a really interesting conversation. Gerry, you kind of touched on this, and Kumi, you did as well. So the market drivers really that are pushing us forward, right? It's electrification is huge. Failing infrastructure or aging infrastructure and the need to modernize. We have shifting customer expectations. We have technologies coming at us from a variety of different perspectives and ways. The digital overhead is, monumental. And then you add the data component and the security components on top of it. it's a wonder that we are all still deciding to do our jobs and we haven't had a mass exodus the way that teachers are leaving their industries when we look at what we're being faced with. Are there any unique drivers that are specific to each of the areas that you're looking at that we haven't touched on? Because, while utilities are like, oh, we're all utilities, or we're all, vendors that work with utilities, there's a lot of difference and variety to what kind of utility, what regulatory bodies are you with, like, et cetera. So, Kumi, what's a unique challenge specific to you or that you're seeing that's driving this change?
So I think we serve investor-owned utilities, co-ops, and munis. And the rate cases are different sometimes. For example, with EV penetration, when we talk to co-ops, maybe you're not funding the infrastructure needed investments through a rate case. So you have to think about how do we incentivize customers, and then how do you manage the existing infrastructure? Are you adding more sources, or are you managing the existing infrastructure? For example, for investor-owned utility, that might be very different from a rate case perspective. And for muni, the financial model might be different. So we always think about, okay, how is the customer thinking about, within their the way they're managing their business model, and how can we help them come to the right solution based on the environment they're working with, right? So that's how we would think about it. But even there are changes if you work in the US versus internationally, right? We have business in the UK, more penetration of EVs in the UK versus the US, right? So again, a little bit different in terms of how you proceed to the solution. And as Gerry talked about, I would say maybe Gerry can talk a little bit more about it. Next is also related to, we just had a conversation outside about how do we play within all the players that's helping the utility and the ecosystem. You're trying to bring solutions working with the other partners that the utility already has, right? Making it work for the utility. So let me pass that on so
Gerry.
we could
Sure,
actually
sure.
add some more to the conversation.
Whether, again, I'm kind of a old tech head at heart. And we talk a lot about interoperability of devices, of systems, of ecosystems. And you have to have interoperability at the highest level of organizations. People have to talk, people have to partner. Vendors have to communicate with other vendors. Standards bodies have to participate in those discussions. And so for all of this to work, there's a level of collaboration and cooperation that's essential to literally rebuild 100 years of a resilient infrastructure that people took advantage of and took for granted, quite frankly, that's now being replaced by all of this wonderful digital technology. So I think that, if you're going to have interoperability from a systems level, you've got to have collaboration and cooperation from a business perspective as well.
Thank you so much, Gerry. And Dwayne, want to bring us home?
Yeah, and you're talking about standards, which I think is awesome, because it comes down to memorializing a lot of that institutional knowledge. Without doing that, you're going to reinvent. You'll wind up reinventing the wheel over and over again. So a lot of times, it's just a function of making sure you have that formal documentation in place, making sure that you don't wind up repeating the same errors that you might have in the past, and then making sure that you set yourself up for the future. And a lot of it, again, it comes back to memorializing institutional knowledge, and then also making sure that the workforce of the future is also set up to handle all the new changes and emerging issues that are coming up.
Amazing. One more thing to make me want to leave my job. So, data is clearly central to this. This is a conversation that we have a lot about data and how it plays a role in this transformation and how we're going to integrate it into our businesses. Can you speak to data for you? And I know I'm going to kick it to you, Dwayne, to kick it off. yeah, like what does data play? How does data play a role with you, and how do you see it making like radical changes moving forward?
Yeah, I think how data plays for me is being in the NERC space. We look at it from a situational awareness standpoint, right? A lot of times back in the day, a lot of folks are more reactive, but what we're trying to do is utilize the data to be more proactive. And again, lessons learned from the past is also making sure that if you can incorporate those lessons learned into like an algorithm, so that when you set that algorithm up on a filter and that data goes through, it should be telling you certain things about how to act and respond to the data when that algorithm detects a certain anomaly that that might be out there. Like I would go and say, we had talked about this last night at dinner, there are certain things on your system that you have a lot of data that's telling you different issues, challenges you have on your system, but do you really study that data to let it tell you and direct you and guide you as it relates to, hey, I had an operation over here and I had 10 to 15 station buses that saw a 5% voltage drop. I mean, that should be like screaming to you like, hey, I need reactive resources over here. But I don't know if anybody's digging through and sifting through that data. And I know when you sift through the data, it's going to tell you, it's going to cause you to do a little bit of work. And I get that. But, like at our company, we always say, see something, say something, do something, right? And this is all about having situational awareness, having surveillance, being able to detect whether or not you have anything going on, and then take action. Because again, the data should drive you to take action. And that's the main thing that I would say that we're using it for. And again, in the compliance space, a lot of it is just trying to avoid and eliminate unforced errors. A lot of stuff, like say on a time-based standpoint, just making sure that you're doing your studies every year. There's certain activities and tasks you got to do on an annual basis, on a quarterly basis, what have you. We have a lot of surveillance out there to make sure that we're driving action so that folks are not unaware of what they have on their plate, but to make sure that they get stuff done. And that's the main thing that we're trying to use that data for.
Yeah, I'll give you guys two examples. One is kind of an organizational example where a client of ours, which is fairly substantial, 15 years ago, we built a NOC for them. 5 years later, we built a SOC for them. Then we built a smart meter operations center. We called it a SMOC. Then we said, the hell with it. We're going to organize all of this capability that we have, these monitoring and surveillance systems, into a single kind of IOC, integrated operations center. So as the data came in, as we deployed technologies to provide this capability, we incrementally added people, we reskilled people, and then eventually we have kind of a cross-functional group of folks to pay attention to the data, which is what Dwayne is talking about. The second example is one where we have a behind-the-meter solution where we collect PV data from behind the meter directly from the manufacturers. We have to curate it, we have to anonymize it, aggregate it, and then we provision it to the marketplace via geocode or some other way of labeling the data that's meaningful for a utility or an RTO. In some cases, in some parts of the country, we've heard organizations tell us, well, PV is not significant enough for us to pay attention to. So we really don't care about actuals. Or we can come up with a profiling algorithm that's an estimate that gets us close enough. But we know that if we hit 15 or 20% of PV installations, we know it's going to be significant enough to cause a problem for us. So we're working with organizations as they kind of observe the data, and then once it becomes problematic, have to build out capabilities and organizational structures to deal with the data.
Thinking about the mock, SOC, SMOC, you should have called the IOC a flock, and then you could have managed the whole thing. Kumi, from a customer perspective, I'm sure this is where you're going, but what about data for you?
For us, I think we look at all of those things, what helps the utility, right? From a customer perspective, what are all the tools in the toolbox for the utility? So it could be technology, it could be process redesign, or it could be cultural transformation taking everything together and providing a more of a holistic solution. Let me also give you maybe a couple of examples around technology, right? So we have meters, we have communication systems, and we have software and analytics. As Gerry talked about, and also Dwayne, we can certainly use all of that technology that we have to provide really granular data into the utilities distribution grid and how they manage the load within that grid when we talk about EVs or distributed energy, right? And then how they manage that load, whether it's a normal sunny day versus like a weather event like what happened last February, right? We are talking to utilities about, hey, what happens if you have a significant weather event and you have to shed this many gigawatts in maybe 5 minutes when ERCOT tells you you have to do that, right? So that's kind of the solutions that we think about. Then we have to go back and say, okay, are we keeping all of our data up to date? Do we have the visibility into that information? And then how do we think at the highest level within the utility in terms of leadership, bringing all of the functions together, as Dwayne talked about, to make sure that we can actually make that come to fruition, right? So that's kind of would be my perspective from both the supplier and how our customers think about it.
And I think one thing you hit on it perfectly is we also got to talk to our vendors. You know, as the field is changing, a lot of data is changing. You know, being a former planning engineer, ops engineer, and doing a lot of studies and doing a lot of data modeling, we would have to do some MacGyver kind of techniques with the data and trying to fake and fudge. Like with the solar array or with storage, we'd put like negative load on the system and try to make things work. So we really have to plug our vendors in to what our problems are and figure out like all those different characteristics and dynamics so that we can perfectly model the grid and study the impacts as opposed to doing all the different techniques to try to make it work. So hopefully the vendors are more plugged in on how to help us get to modeling everything, put everything together, and we spend more time focused on the studies as opposed to, you know, the duct taping and all that other stuff. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. So now we kind of have the landscape, right? And I know that you guys intimately in the audience experience this on a daily basis. So, you know, we're just laying the foundation because this is really about radical change makers and innovation. So with that, you know, Kumi, could you kick us off? How are the business models changing, or better yet, like what isn't changing but absolutely needs to change in order to make this kind of thing possible?
What is absolutely changing is obviously the load profiles on the grid, right? That is going to be radical. It's coming at us, and we have to be prepared to address that. I was reading the other day, there was this study in the UK in terms of EV penetration. And they were talking about in the UK, you know, people drive on average 7,500 miles, you know, per year. And in the US, that's about 13,500 miles per year. That means in terms of total energy capacity or load, it's about 20 to 25% in the UK. It's about 25 to 30% in the US, right? But that penetration is not going to happen immediately, right? So when you're talking about your business models, you have to think about, are we going to add additional resources, or how do we even use the resources that you have more effectively in terms of load management? And then you have to think about, okay, if you're managing your loads more effectively, are you thinking about load shedding applications? Are you incentivizing your customers to sign up for those sort of applications? Are you going to have some sort of peak demand sort of pricing models? Are you going to throttle loads? Is everybody going to charge at the same time, right? Those kind of things, and also work out the economics that work for both the utility and then also their consumers, right? And then around resilience, how do we continuously make sure that the utilities are serving their customers very effectively in terms of the supply they provide without interruptions, safely providing those services, and also making sure it's very transparent to the customers in terms of what they're using. So I know I spoke a lot of things. Then I'm sure Gerry and Dwayne will have additional points in terms of that conversation.
Gerry, what absolutely needs to change?
You know, I don't have a crystal ball. I will tell you that one of the drivers that we didn't talk about, and it's almost implied in everything that we do, is climate change. I've got clients who are, because of the political climate today, they're focused on climate change and its pervasive impact on both the political landscape as well as customer preference, which is driving everything we do, which is driving the impact on loads that were just discussed. So all of that has a pervasive impact both on the cost structure of a legacy organization, but also it drives market opportunity for all of us that can be taken advantage of and captured. So having a scalable organization to deal with the change and understand the environment within which we're operating, collaboration, competition, will really determine who, as we place our bets, who are the winners and the losers, who's going to survive as these markets shake out, where will there be contraction, and where will the opportunities grow from.
Thank you. Dwayne.
Yeah, and I think this also give us an opportunity to, like we always talk about pilot projects, right? Because nobody wants to ultimately commit to anything. So I think this will give us some pilot projects to experiment, to test some things out, like on different feeders around your particular territory. So you look at rooftop DG that is starting to populate everywhere. Is there somewhere where you go down and you maybe attach a battery EV charger to a rooftop solar panel on people's houses, businesses, what have you? A lot of places they'll have like EV garages or EV chargers that'll be near shopping malls or anything like that. I know when we did like a Shark Tank thing a couple years ago, we looked at a lot of substations where you have substations in urban areas where you have a lot of businesses around a substation. There's some additional real estate around it. Why not put like a parking lot and have EV chargers right next to that? Has an opportunity. Then also, I'm trying to think here. What else did we have going on? I thought you were about to say something.
No, it's actually hard for me not to personalize this. I have about 7.5 kV on my roof. I've got 2 power walls. I've got nests everywhere. I have a Landis & Gear smart meter on my back. I mean, I'm living the life, and I also have to cooperate with my utility company, who provides certificates and all kinds of other information about the performance of my system on a periodic basis. So I'm sure I was a big pain for them to have to deal with. On the other hand, I got exactly what I wanted, what I asked for, and now I have kind of my own little utility in my house.
Yeah, and that's the main thing that helps, And again, you could be like one of those poster child that'll come there and they'll do a story on you and everything from that aspect.
I love that.
I fly
Gerry's the
under
poster
radar.
child.
I would say from a pilot perspective, Dwayne, that's one of the things that we talk to. Most of our customers really want to try different things out and see what happens. They want to model the economics around it, how the acceptance from their consumers as well. So I think it's, as Gerry also talked about, it's a great opportunity. And I think people who, or companies or vendors who cooperate with the utility in terms of coming up with the right solutions are going to be the winners in the end if we really work together and collaborate.
And then it's just trying to understand how do you put those financial incentives out there to encourage people to participate in the pilot as well.
So there's a term that I learned last week that I think is really great, which is pilot purgatory. And I think whether you're testing new innovation models or you're getting customers into a pilot program, there is going to be a decision point that needs to be made, especially if you want to continue and not lose buy-in, not lose traction, and the fact that the clock is running out on all of us for a lot of different reasons. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left before we open it up to questions. I really hope you guys in the audience are getting primed and ready to be engaged. It's a small room, so I can see you. One more question, because we want to talk about the cultural shift that's happening too, right? Because we're not just talking about innovative models, but also radical change that needs to happen within the organization. So, Dwayne, with that, identifying the need for change is important, but implementing change is critical for true transformation, and it's incredibly difficult, even in the best of situations, often breaking down due to cultural organizational challenges. So, what cultural shifts are required to make this happen?
It's just being innovative. A lot of times folks want to do the same thing over and over again, hoping to make a change in the industry. And it's just a function of having leadership and power, folks to take those courageous steps, because a lot of times, you know, folks are afraid to take any kind of step out of the norm, right? And it also has to be from a peer perspective too. I mean, there are a lot of younger folks that are coming into the industry that are pretty fearless. They want to try new things, and we need to encourage those folks to step up and not be afraid to put those ideas in a room and then have everybody kind of jump on it, because without that shift, you can't anticipate operating in the same format that you've operated in the last 20, 30, 40 years and be ready for this new challenge, this new wave of devices, this new wave of load that's coming online. So I think the main thing is going to be leadership from above to kind of like push the boundaries, push the issue, to like help people be courageous. And then for the younger folks that are coming in that don't know any better, right? You want to encourage and keep them putting those ideas in a room, because without that, you're just destined to go down that same path that we've always been going down over the last couple of years. So that'd be the main thing from a cultural standpoint.
Thank you. Gerry?
Yeah, I say thank God for the new generation of talent coming up, because, again, culturally, we used to talk about kind of, you know, the engineering culture or the process-focused culture or the kind of cost management culture. And, you know, we're evolving very quickly, and that's all important, but the blocking and tackling around data was often overlooked, and paying attention to the result, not the, you know, midterm performance. So data is like at the top of the list. If you can do the data right from a blocking and tackling standpoint, then you can see the opportunities that the new devices produce, the data, and the new opportunities that derive from the data that's out there. And most organizations have got it in their shop somewhere. They have to do a better job of paying attention to it.
Excellent. And Kumi, you want to lead us home?
Sure. So I would talk about going back to having that innovation mindset in terms of removing barriers, keeping a safe space for innovation, and letting people be brave, asking the teams to go, take those long shots sometimes. We do something, at Aclara, we have NPX process. Those are things that you're experimenting with. You are allowed to fail. Actually, we fund it knowing some of those projects would fail, but fail fast, right? Come up with the ideas and fail fast, and then let's go fund some of those initiatives, understanding some of those are not all going to be very successful. So giving the team that freedom to do that, I think, creates a culture, and it's coming from, our CEO at Hubbell Utility Solutions, giving room to experiment and also fail sometimes. And we say it's not really a failure if you experiment and learn, and maybe adjust as a result, right? Keeping that culture, as Dwayne said, creating that culture is very important.
Yeah, from my experience, innovation dies in the middle, which is really unfortunate because there's a lot of bubble up that happens. There's a lot of really new ideas that try to make it to the top that can't get there. Top can make a decision. We're going to be innovative. We're going to be agile. We're going to implement all these things. And then your middle managers are like, oh, no, it's one more thing on my plate. And how do I actually make it happen? So if you're going to pursue innovation, then supporting and empowering people in the middle to actually make it happen and equipping them with the tools and resources required. Okay, so now we're looking at you guys because it's your turn. So yes, ma'am.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hubbell is the CEO of Electric Power Engineers and ENRA.ai, which is energy intelligence. So I spun out the software as a startup. I'm going to tell you in 2 sentences what it is, and I'm going to ask the team here to be the judges. My colleague here, Khalil from Boston Energy, is saying I should be there. I'm sitting at the edge of my chair. This is an LCRA. At the edge of my chair thinking this is an amazing topic, and you address things that at night I cannot sleep thinking if we can't plan for all of this, then we're going to stay at the pilot project stage, because this is what I do at Electric Power Energy is planning, right? To plan, you've got to know what to do with all this data and project it to the future. And to what Dwayne said, you've got to know what this operational model looks like and give it to the planners, or take that AMI data or utilize the AMI. So what I spun out of the consulting business is a niche gap, which is taking the data and the analytics, marrying it to the granular operational model at the utility, and giving it to the power systems tools in the form and shape that it needs, so that the utility does not have to be stuck in going back to the vendor. Don't change the vendor. You're using synergy, use synergy, but use something in between to transform it into something that your people know how to use. So this is how granular it is. What do you think?
Why weren't you in our start at ETS competition?
I told Jason, he said, we have to vet you first, so I wasn't ready.
Well, we're going to vet you next year. Panelists? Any comments?
Well, I don't know whether to commiserate with you or applaud you, because I'm sick of pilots.
Yeah.
We built a similar type of solution for the behind-the-meter solar, and we provision it to an RTO. And initially, our experience was they couldn't consume the data to incorporate into their load forecast. They didn't have a process set up to do it. So we taught them how to do that. First it was the month ahead market, then it was the week ahead, then it was the day ahead, then the hour ahead. Now we're developing what's called an nowcast. But it took 5 years to get to that point. And over the course of that, as entrepreneurs do, we want customer number 2. So we did pilots all over the country. And I'm sick and tired of doing pilots, but each pilot yielded different perspectives. We learned about storage out in California. We learned about, weather events down here in Texas. We learned some things unique in PJM. But educating the utility and kind of cracking the code on how to work with them is always the biggest challenge to get to the next level.
You gotta be stubborn.
You look kind of stubborn.
I feel your pain.
And I just say data quality, because again, like we talked about, there's a lot of data out there that we have, and I don't know if we're like sifting through the data to look at, are we finding blanks, zeros, and nulls for like facility ratings, right? There's, in a lot of your models, believe it or not, like I had to struggle too. So I was one of the guys that got stuck with the model. And I don't say volunteered, I got stuck with it, right? And if you ask anybody in any power company, a lot of people get stuck with having to maintain that model, but there's no diary, there's no log, there's no kind of archival history of, all right, I put this new line in, I put this new transformer in. So everybody's starting from scratch. And that's scary when you think about the proliferation of errors that have gone in from year and year and year out. And that's the planning model, which is a feeder going into the operational model for EMS, contingency analysis. So that's another scary level. And again, if you know the different things that you're looking for, like from an impedance standpoint, from a rating standpoint, from a topology standpoint, you know, when I was, again, taking care of all this stuff, you would see a 69 kV bus tied directly to a 130 kV bus, and there's no transformation in between. So again, these errors are like populated back and forth, and it's gut wrenching, right? So that's you need to have somebody who's going to take ownership of that model, and it has to be someone that doesn't get stuck with it, but someone who actually wants to do that job and have some formal change management around it. Otherwise, again, it keeps me up at night too. I don't admit it to, out loud, but yeah, I feel your pain.
You just did.
Yeah, I know.
Can I borrow one of the microphones?
Oh.
I'm going to hand it to the people that are
Oh,
asking
okay.
questions.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
share. So, while she's, you
Go
have a
ahead,
question?
go
So I would say I applaud you, and I'd say, obviously pilots forever is not something we encourage either. I would say start with small wins, right? Get a small win on the board, prove your case, and even sometimes when we do pilots, we say let's just go through just this sub, right, and show the results. And if you can make the economics work, maybe we can think about taking it to multiple subs, etc. Right? So that's the way we think about it. But I do, as Gerry said, sometimes it's a little bit hard.
Excellent. Looks like we have another question.
Yeah. So a lot of the data technologies that you're talking about really would benefit from access to cloud computing resources or kind of more high-powered, maybe not on-prem computing environments. What's your guys' perspective on readiness in the utility industry to kind of tackle that? Are we ready for the cloud?
I'd say from a data perspective, we have a mix of customers in terms of on-premise versus cloud. There's always the worry around cybersecurity that is brought up when we say let's move from on-prem to cloud. But we always talk about some of these providers are experts in their fields in terms of cybersecurity, right? As long as they follow standards. So it takes some convincing. Are they all ready for it and accepting of it? I would say not yet. But the trends are going that way, I would say today. Today it's about 50% for our customers. And I'm sure Gerry will have a point of view on that as well.
Well, truth be told, I spent 20 years at IBM, and I would say that there were very few that probably 8 years ago when I left really internalized. They were dabbling. They were doing pilots, if you will. If you look at the landscape today, there's a lot of dabbling. There's some functional pockets in either Azure, AWS. Some of the bigger vendors are saying, get into my cloud, or we're going to do something else. So I think the market is going to drag utilities into the cloud, and I think it's going to take time. But right now, I mean, if you ask today, are they ready for it? I've been involved with some clients that they were hell-bent on doing massive upgrade projects in the cloud, and they all backed away from it. So the best of intentions sometimes go awry when you look at the economics, you look at the skill sets that are required, and you look at really what they're sacrificing in terms of the cost equation.
Yeah, a lot of it's going to boil down to your cyber policy as well. Yeah, because again, based on the NERC SIP standards, based on how you write up your cybersecurity policy, is going to dictate to what you can have in the cloud and what you can't have in the cloud. There'll be certain things that are very particular from a SIP 2 standpoint. SIP 3, when you're looking at your NERC SIP high, medium, and low impact stations and trying to like lay out like everything technically so that no one can penetrate you with that information being in the cloud. But then you have things on the operation and planning side, like with your low models, anything from a PRC5 standpoint that might be in your asset management database, looking at scheduling, maintenance on different equipment out there in the field, that might be available in the cloud. But it's just all going to be on your cybersecurity policy. That's going to get you there.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you all so much. Let's give these panelists a round of applause. Please do harass them. They want to talk to you, I promise you. And with that, you all can stick around for the next session or move to the next one, but thank you so much.